From the European Parliament here in Brussels, this is Raw Politics. Thanks for joining us tonight. Here's what's coming up. Brexit interrupted 9 days before deadline. Politicians on both sides of the Channel fight over how, when and if the UK will leave. All but dead. Donald Trump Jr. strikes out at the state of UK democracy over Brexit. Banning Orban, the EU's biggest political group. The EPP discusses whether to expel Hungary's Viktor Orban. Invisible tracking. A new Danish report says that the EU's government's website may be breaking its own privacy rules. And ringing endorsement. Donald Trump welcomes the so-called Trump of the tropics. A very good evening. Welcome to Raw Politics. Tessa is off tonight. You've got me and our very wide range of delightful guests over the next hour. Let's welcome, though, our panellists. First up, we've got Marietje Schaake, who is a Dutch MEP and sits with the ALDE group. First of all, what are you watching tonight? Well, I'm such an overwhelming amount of topics, but when I hear Donald Trump Jr. saying that he worries about the state of democracy in the UK, I also wonder who is he elected by, you know? And I think it's better if the Trumps focus on what's going on in their own country. Well, there you go. The European response to that. Philippe Lamberts is a Belgian MEP. He's also the co-chair of the Greens EFA group and sits on the Parliament's Brexit Steering Committee. What about you, Philippe?
Well, I'd rather focus on Orban, to be honest. What I find remarkable is that for its own party, the European People's Party, it was OK to go after the judiciary, after the press, after the opposition, after migrants. This was all fair game. But when it is about Jean-Claude Juncker, this is crossing the red line. Well, we're expecting a big decision to happen later on today, something that could decide not just what happens in the next couple of months, potentially the EU elections to come as well. And we've got Peter Jahr. He's a German MEP with the EPP group. What are you looking at, Peter?
Oh, I'm very interested in what's going on with the issue of Brexit, because, in my opinion, I think we should also admit, or we should also take focus that we have also a deadline. And for me, one of the most important deadline is also the time of European election. And nobody talk about this.
But not March 29th, as it initially was, what, in 9 days' time. But that is where we begin tonight. It is with Brexit. And despite assuring her party for the last 2 years that she won't ask for an extension, today, the UK Prime Minister, Theresa May, did just that and requested an EU pause to the Brexit countdown clock for 3 months until June 30th. But the EU Commission hit straight back. It called Theresa May's extension plan, quote, legally and politically difficult. And it said it favoured either a short extension until May 23rd, as Peter was suggesting, before the EU elections, or a significantly longer one. And that sets the scene for a clash between the EU and Mrs May at tomorrow's summit in Brussels. Here's what Theresa May, the UK Prime Minister, had to say at Prime Minister's Question Time in Westminster earlier today.
I have therefore this morning written to President Tusk, the President of the European Council, informing him that the UK seeks an extension to the Article 50 period until the 30th of June. Copies of the letter are being placed in the libraries of the House. The government intends to bring forward proposals for a third meaningful vote. If that vote is passed, the extension will give the House time to consider the withdrawal agreement bill. If not, the House will have to decide how to proceed. But as Prime Minister, I am not prepared to delay Brexit any further than the 30th of June.
Well, joining us now from London is our correspondent, Tag Enright, who is in Westminster for us. Tag, when you look at this and what the Prime Minister talked about there during that short extension period, she reiterated not once but twice that she wasn't prepared as Prime Minister to extend it beyond the end of June, suggesting that she might not be the Prime Minister to make that decision, that this could be a resignation issue for her.
Yeah, that question very much hanging over that statement today. And Downing Street, when asked by political correspondents to comment on that, not wanting to be drawn on it. The reality for Theresa May, though, when it comes to her party support base, is that her party has long since given up with speaking with one voice on the fundamental issue of Brexit. So as to the decision today to take the longer extension off the table, the response to that is effectively governed by whether you are a no-dealer, somebody who wants to leave with a deal, or if you do hold out some hope still of a Remain outcome to all of this. And it was those pro-Brexit, even hard Brexit voices within her cabinet which forced her into this position today. Those are the people who think that no deal would be just fine, perhaps in some cases even preferable. But it was certainly dismayed many others for whom they recognise getting a deal will take a long time. And certainly, too, dismayed the moderates who have seen yet another example of hard Brexiteers bullying Theresa May into a corner. You know, if you'd asked me my forecast this morning as to why Theresa May was taking a long extension off the table, it was so that she could be seen as being forced into a longer extension, because that's what we thought the EU wanted. But then Jean-Claude Juncker knocked all that out of the water by saying actually a shorter extension might actually be his preference. Perhaps that's only a bargaining position too. And of course, it's not a decision for him, it's a decision for the Council of Leaders.
And in many regards, they are piling pressure on Theresa May, talking about these two choices she has. But of course, she has got one final strategy, which is to try and get her deal still through the UK Parliament. She seems to be pushing yet still for a third vote. Can that still happen, given what's happened this week at Westminster?
Certainly, I think you're referring to what the House Speaker John Bercow said earlier this week, saying that no two votes of that are the same vote can happen within any one parliamentary period. You know, I think it is still logistically possible, even if it's not politically possible. If she can muster a majority around her withdrawal agreement, there are ways and means of overcoming that obstacle put into place by John Bercow. And certainly that's what her timetable is based on, getting that deal over the line next week and hoping that this escalated prospect of a no-deal Brexit might ratchet up the pressure on those people who are still holding out. But I think working against her is that some within her own party really smell blood, and they sense an opportunity to knock her out of the running, to take control over this process. There is a rump of around 20 Conservative MPs who have said no, under no circumstances will they support this withdrawal agreement, whatever happens to the backstop. And when you have a parliamentary majority as small as Theresa May's is, well, then those 20 MPs could very easily stand in the way.
Interesting stuff. Tag Wright joining us from Westminster, our correspondent there. Thank you very much indeed. You know, Theresa May is under an awful lot of pressure. I think we can all agree on that. She is some way stuck between a rock and a hard place, between her own party and Brussels. Is Brussels making her life more difficult, though, by suggesting that she cannot have this extension, which seems terribly reasonable, until the end of June?
Well, I think it's been very clear from the EU side that there would be legal uncertainty if it would go beyond May 23rd. This is not a surprise. And in many ways, it's not even an answer to Theresa May. The question is, why did she not listen to that advice from the European Union? And I don't think that the EU or anyone is interested on our side to apply pressure on Theresa May. Frankly, we see enough of it coming from London. Our interest is, and the EU's interest should be, to preserve the certainty of the EU 27 in this very chaotic process.
But it's also not to see the UK crash out, because that would be...
No, we don't want that. Personally, I don't even want Brexit. But now that this is happening, we also have to make sure that this extension that has now been demanded is met with something different on the table than what we've seen before. Because the question that is still unanswered is an extension for what? And exactly. I don't see anything closer to a parliamentary majority. I don't see anything alternative on the table but the withdrawal agreement, which has been voted down twice. So we need to understand what the extension would lead to, and we cannot just extend indefinitely.
Well, there were moves, and we did see over the weekend and over the last week or so, MPs finally switching to Theresa May's deal. When it comes down to this, what was talked about as being kind of legally and politically difficult situation for the for the Europeans when it comes to this, we all know that Brussels can come up. They can get round these rules. They can find legal routes to these things? They've done it before. Why can they not do it again?
No, again, this is a misreading of what Brussels is doing. I mean, we will not shift the date of the European election. If the United Kingdom is a member state on the date of the election, it is legally bound to organise the elections, period. There's no way around it.
But as far as I understand it, when Sweden joined, Austria joined,
but this is joining the EU. Here, the UK has joined, is a member. And until the United Kingdom is legally out of the European Union, it is a member. And there's no way around this. And when you speak about making their lives easier, what makes it difficult is not our inflexibility. What makes it difficult is a legally binding treaty that the United Kingdom freely subscribed to called the Good Friday Agreement. That is a constraint. If you did not have that constraint, the UK could achieve a clean cut with the European Union. It cannot because of the Good Friday Agreement. So we did not create that Good Friday Agreement. The UK created it together with the Republic of Ireland.
Peter, what are you in favour of a long extension?
But I don't understand.
If it avoids the UK crashing out, and it's probably what Parliament in the UK wants, would you be in favour of a long extension?
If I understand the communication right, there was EU say, okay, we will not say to postpone something, but you have to say, Theresa May, you have to say why. Is there a change if you postpone this? And then there was, I would say, two versions on the table: postponed till before the European election, or
for a long period.
I haven't heard the Prime Minister saying that she wants elections,
and I don't understand
that she wants to participate in the European elections. Can you imagine what the House would look like if she said, we want to extend beyond May 23rd and therefore we're going to participate in the European Parliament elections? Nigel Farage probably be happy so he can participate.
Not the Greens as
well. I think that a lot of people...
But the end of June is
I don't think she would get support for participating in the European elections. Has she put it on the table? No. So the real questions continue to be pushed forward, and that is the problem.
But what I don't understand is this because, and I'm not entirely sure why Europe is in favour of a long extension, when what it could mean is a lot more Nigel Farages in the European Parliament, potentially a different Brexiteer leader who might be willing to veto legislation and to cause real angst here in Brussels, and a British commissioner who, again, might be quite difficult.
But who is in favour of a long extension? I don't hear voices for that.
Well, Donald Tusk said he was last week.
Well, but again, only if there is something on the table, and there isn't.
Exactly. One thing at a time. First, Theresa May's strategy has been very clear now. It was running down the clock.
Yeah.
If she comes back saying, give me more time to run down the clock longer, sorry.
Exactly.
Sorry. No, because all the elements of the decision are on the table and have been on the table for the last 18 months, since the joint declaration at the end of 2017. So everything is known. What is lacking is the political courage or the political will to strike the deal. And if the British Parliament is unable or unwilling to take up its own responsibilities, then the next step should be back to the people. And if you need more time to go back to the people, this is something I understand. Then, of course, we will grant you the time that is necessary to go back to the people. And if that means an additional 6 months, fine. But then, of course, you participate in the European elections, because the conclusion of a second referendum might be that the UK stays in the European Union.
So are we looking at, Peter, then, essentially the EU saying, OK, we might give you an extension, but it's got a whole list of conditions attached to it?
Not a whole list. No. In the end, we wait for a proposal from Great Britain with a majority in the Parliament.
Exactly.
That's very easy.
We need a plan.
We need an agenda with a majority.
Of course.
And now we know nothing. And in the end, you have to think about it. But does it mean to postpone till end of June? If there come end of June and there's no solution, what's happened? They take part of the election or not, that is, we have to take care. Also, we have to do, European Union, the 27 member states, a European election, and we have to make it sure, very sure, or from the legal base.
Well, you guys are all politicians, and you all know that things are about compromise, and Theresa May doesn't clearly want to split her party, though it is interesting tonight that Downing Street have announced that Theresa May is going to meet with the opposition leaders, potentially for further talks ahead of the Council tomorrow.
At long last.
At long last, there you go. Well, it's not just the views of these MEPs here that reflect on this Brexit process. We managed to catch up with some others earlier on today about whether or not there should be an extension. Here's what they had to say.
My mother is British, so it's a heartache for me. An extension, yes, they have to decide. They have to get their act together because we have decided they haven't.
Well, there must be an extension somehow, I'm afraid. But I'm not so sure that granting an extension will make British politics solve the issue.
I don't know, because they said March 29, and I think they are going to leave March 29. I hope so.
It depends on the conditionality. So if there is a hint that there's a possibility to overcome the deadlock in the parliament, then yes. But if it just is to have more time, then it doesn't make any sense.
I have no idea, but it's absolutely clear that we are not able to solve it on 29th of March. I mean, it's basically in a week, which is not doable.
They have found so many ways to say no. They should find a way to say, you know, OK.
There you go. It's extraordinary that everyone seems quite unanimous on this. But also, Philippe, I get a real sense that people here are really frustrated now with London.
Yeah, but then again, this is life. I mean, life is also full of frustrations. We have to make do with that. That's part of life, so keep calm and carry on.
Well, we're going to keep calm and carry on, but we're definitely going to carry on because Brexit as an issue, potentially an extraordinary EU Council summit again next week to look out for, in addition to the one that starts tomorrow. It's going to be a fascinating week. Well, as we say, if the Brexit process wasn't complicated enough, and believe me, it really is, yet another person has decided to jump in on the debate. This time, it was Donald Trump Jr., President Trump's son. He said that Brexit apparently could have been sorted out in just a few short months. Well, how? All Theresa May had to do was listen to his dad's advice. He went on in a newspaper article to say, with the deadline fast approaching, it appears that democracy in the UK is all but dead. Why is this important for us Americans? Because Brexit is an example of how the establishment elites try to subvert the will of the people when they're given the chance. They've got a point on all of this, doesn't he, Donald Trump? Not necessarily about Theresa May having to take President Trump's advice, but this idea about subverting democracy. You know, here is a referendum, the biggest referendum the UK had ever participated in, and yet it looks like it's possibly not going to be followed through. That's not great.
What
for
makes
democracy.
you say that? I think that's pure demagoguery. I think what we hear from Donald Trump Jr. is actually completely bogus and is meant to scare people and to turn them away from liberal democracy. Is very serious, and I hope people will defend their democracy.
And yes, democracy means surely upholding the referendum result, which there are MPs at Westminster and there are politicians here in Brussels determined to stop Brexit from happening. What does that say about European democracy?
I don't agree with that. I totally disagree with that. We have negotiated Brexit. I mean, the order that 52%, just 52% of the British voters that day...
A majority.
Yes, but, you know, democracy is not the dictatorship of the majority. Never forget that. Now, 52% of the people say negotiate Brexit. That's what Theresa May did. Not very well, but she did it. We ended up with a withdrawal agreement. This the only one possible given the red lines that the British Prime Minister has set. Now, we have it. I mean, we are not frustrating...
And the people have voted on it.
If the Parliament votes for that, Brexit is there. If the Parliament refuses it, what can we do? What can we do? Again, the Good Friday Agreement binds the hands of the British government,
I understand that point,
whatever government.
But there are a lot of British people out there who do feel frustrated that something they voted on is...
But frustration is not the same as a failure of democracy. Let's not forget that.
Interesting. As I say, it is a discussion likely to continue for a long time to come. Anyway, let's stay to a degree with the US, and trade with America will be on the EU's radar at this week's summit. EU-US trade relations, as we well know, have hit a new low point when President Trump imposed tariffs on steel and aluminium while threatening 25% tariffs on Europe's car industry. But rather surprisingly, last summer, Jean-Claude Juncker and President Trump seemed to agree, in theory, to work towards zero tariffs for all non-auto industrial goods. Sounds simple? Well, have a look at this clip. It might remind you of why a trade deal between America and Europe could be anything but straightforward.
We have a tremendous trade imbalance, but we're going to get that straightened out. It'll be better and better, I think, as time goes by. We're trying to make a deal. They're very tough to make a deal with the EU. They've been very difficult over a period of time, over many, many years. You could call it retaliation, but I'd rather just say that we want reciprocal. So whether it's with European Union or others, it has to be reciprocal in nature at a minimum. And so it's something we think about, and we're negotiating with them. If we don't make the deal, we'll do the tariffs.
Well, joining me to discuss this, we got Jan Žadal. He is the Conservative Czech MEP and Vice Chair of the International Trade Committee. Sam Wilkin, Brussels Bureau Chief at MLEX, and still with me is Maricha as well. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Yeah, let's start with you. When we look at this issue of US-EU trade, the EU has repeatedly said we're not willing to start negotiations again unless you remove these trade tariffs, and we're not willing to negotiate trade with a country that's not signed up to the to the Paris Climate Change Accords. Is the EU now caving in, essentially, to US pressure? Is Donald Trump winning?
Well, I believe whatever has been said, one thing is clear, and this is that the transatlantic market is still the biggest in the world, that the volume of mutual trade is enormous, the volume or the level of mutual investments is enormous, and I think that the time is up to restart some new level of negotiations and new level of relations. So I believe that to set a preconditions, if we know, for instance, that Trump's administration would not be willing to join Paris Climate Agreement, I think it wouldn't be wise to put that as a precondition, because that means that, in fact, EU doesn't want to start any new negotiations with US, and I think that it would be a mistake.
But hasn't essentially Donald Trump held a gun to the EU's head, and it's had to move ground because the threats have worked?
Well, this is why there is such difficulty in getting these negotiations off the ground, and we've seen the draft conclusions for tomorrow's summit, and they support negotiations, but they don't give any target start date. It suggests there's not been any great progress recently, and yes, you're right. This is fundamentally defensive in nature, these negotiations. Both sides entered into it to try to avoid an escalation of the trade war, as it's been called, rather than because they actually want to trade more closely with each other. It's to see off the threat of any more tariffs. And so when you have that atmosphere of distrust, it's very hard to actually build consensus. And all the old issues about agriculture start coming back into it.
And there's another point. We look at these negotiations. Do Europeans necessarily want, for example, a free trade deal that might mean things like chlorinated chicken, for example, in EU households?
Not the chlorinated chicken again. Because even if we had a comprehensive trade and investment partnership, that would not mean that our food safety laws would change, and we would not import chlorinated chicken, even with a deal. And I would never have thought that I would get nostalgic for the days that we were still negotiating the transatlantic trade and investment partnership. But I am, because it's not that we don't want to have closer trade relations, on the contrary. But it is true that a lot of trust has been lost because the Trump administration has escalated the confrontation so much by imposing tariffs on the basis of national security to our allies.
Is his strategy working?
Is his strategy working? No, of course it's not. There's a huge backlash to his farmers, small and medium-sized enterprises, his economy, because also the EU has answered the tariffs that the Trump administration imposed with mitigating measures. So it's not like the EU is sitting here, taking all the hits of the tariffs without any answer. We have compensated with, retaliatory measures, but we want to de-escalate. And I think that somebody has to be the adult in the room, and it's clearly not going to be the Americans. So we have to keep our heads cool and de-escalate and move forward where we can. But this is not a comprehensive trade and investment negotiation now.
So where do we go? Where do we go to next? I mean, we are looking potentially, though, at a Trump presidency that may well last for, 5-6 years into the future. Are we just looking at these talks actually dragging on for quite a long time with nothing being achieved?
First of all, I believe that we have to start somewhere. I can imagine that the precondition could be that US removes those tariffs because they are really hardly acceptable for us. I wouldn't mix it with the Paris Climate Agreement because it doesn't make any sense to me. And yeah, there will be a new European Parliament, there will be a new Commission, and I hope that there will be a new start as well.
Sam, very quickly, do you think there'll be how long will it take for an actual deal to be signed?
I think the success of these talks will actually be in avoiding any new tariffs, particularly on cars next month. As I say, we're in a defensive mode at the moment, and just stopping any escalation has got to be the goal.
Well, it has to be said, it's not just trade. EU-US relations aren't exactly going very well at the moment. Guys, thank you very much indeed. We're going to take a short break here on Raw Politics. Coming up, though, it's crunch time for Viktor Orban. He targeted the Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker in a poster campaign, and now the European Parliament's biggest party is deciding whether to expel the populist leader from its ranks. We'll have more on all that next. Welcome back to Raw Politics. Now, the showdown between Brussels and Budapest became a lot closer tonight with a debate and discussion between Viktor Orban's Fidesz party facing that crucial vote on whether or not it will be expelled from its parliamentary family, and the largest group here, the European People's Party. The Hungarian heavyweight arrived in Brussels earlier to look his critics in the eye as they accused him of dismantling liberal democracy and flouting the rule of law. His anti-EU discourse and authoritarian approach have inflamed tensions with the bloc for months. A recent billboard campaign targeting high-level officials provoked outrage and forced the EPP's chair to travel to Hungary with an ultimatum. Well, let's take a look at what's at stake for the EPP, for the European People's Party, ahead of those elections and the vote this afternoon. The group is the largest party here in the European Parliament, holding 217 out of the 750 seats. Mr. Orban's Fidesz party makes up 12 of those seats and helps the group maintain a healthy majority. With just 2 months, though, until EU elections, early predictions show that while it's likely to remain the largest group, its position will already be weakened. Back in the studio to talk about all this, we've got Peter, Jar, we've also got Jan as well, and Margarita as well. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Peter, you're in the EPP. What do you want to see happen?
The answer is I don't know, because I said also last week there was also discussion. I say it's
you don't know what you want to happen. Do you want to see him suspended from the party essentially?
I want to say, I also say that there was last week also a meeting we talked about this, and my opinion is very clear. He have only not changed his behavior. We need also really action. Will he really change his strategy, bashing Brussels, bashing the EPP? That would be the key question in this discussion. And believe the other people what Orban will say or say to the other.
But he's shown no sign he's willing to change.
That's a question. I don't know what's going on in this discussion, and have Orban a clear evidence, or can he make sure that he wants to change his strategy? Because if there is no change, then we have to suspend the membership.
So you think if he doesn't change, he should be suspended? Right. Maybe he should come and join you guys.
Well, we will see. Neither me, I don't know what's going to happen within the EPP. For me, it is a clear evidence that EPP is a family just by name. In fact, this is very internally diverse. It is very internally incoherent. My feeling is that there is also some division between Western and Eastern part of the EPP, let's say. And Mr. Orban is a skillful player. He knows how to play the game. He always relied on some of his allies in the EPP, German parties, Austrian parties, that whatever he does, they will back him at the end. Seems that now the situation has changed. Maybe he overplayed a little bit, so we will see what's going to happen now.
Would you like to see Fidesz join the ERC?
Well, it doesn't depend on us. It depends on him, on his decision.
But what if he knocks on your door today?
If he leaves, or if he is expelled or suspended or whatever, if he shows some willingness to negotiate with us, of course we are open to that. But it is too early to say anything on this.
The door is open. Isn't this a sign, though, of not just a problem for the EPP, but also a wider problem for Europe that has struggled to deal with Orban over the last couple of years?
No, I think it's a sign of ultimate cynicism, because this should not be about East versus West or about not knowing what is going on in the meeting of the EPP today. This is about the principles of the rule of law that Viktor Orban has violated over and over again. And frankly, if it is the straw that breaks the camel's back that he has now insulted Juncker, I actually think that's pretty sad, because there have been much more fundamental violations going on in Hungary, a country deeply divided. And so I think that principles and the violation thereof should have consequences, and I hope that they will today. And if not, then it will be a very, very sad day for Europe and also for the Hungarian people that are worried about where their country is going.
Well, let's get the view actually now from Hungary, and we can cross to Budapest and join Benjamin Novak. He writes for the New York Times and is the editor of Insight Hungary. Benjamin, thank you very much indeed for joining us. What do you think the strategy for Viktor Orban is, given the fact that he seems to have walked to the cliff edge with the EPP? Why is he doing that? Clearly, it must play very well where you are.
Yeah, we can't really tell what the strategy is. What we do know is that in Hungary, in the massive pro-government media conglomerate that Mr. Orban has erected over the past few years, the message has been pretty clear. It is that on one hand, Fidesz wants to remain in the EPP, but there are better allies out there on the European political landscape. And the other message is that the EPP has lost touch with Christian values and is being influenced by left liberals who want migration and who are supported by George Soros. So the message is erratic, but it is steering Hungarians in a direction that would see Fidesz's departure from the EPP as a generally positive thing.
And you say positive, Benjamin. Ultimately, Orban thinks that actually domestically this is quite good for him. Could what's happening here, though, ultimately in some form or another, briefly, if you could explain, could it count against him? Could this actually prove very bad for him domestically?
I don't think so. As far as domestic politics are concerned, Mr. Orban has built a very finely tuned machine in Hungary over the past 9 years, and there is very little domestically that could potentially pose a challenge to his power. What is very interesting to see here, though, is that for many years, Mr. Orban relied on the EPP as a sort of shield against all kinds of external criticism. As one of the guests pointed out earlier, that it appears this final attack on Mr. Juncker was the straw that broke the camel's back. Well, the camel's back is now broken. The EPP appears to be so upset that, you know, there are talks of a potential suspension coming up. And if that suspension happens, it'll be very interesting to see how Fidesz actually walks that through its base, how it carries that message and the implications of that through its base. So I think there's a lot to happen still, and we'll be watching this very closely.
Indeed we do. Benjamin Novak joining us there from Budapest. Thank you very much indeed for your insight there. It is pretty bad, isn't it, Peter, if this comes down to the fact that the straw that broke the camel's back is an attack on Jean-Claude Juncker, given what Viktor Orban's been up to in Hungary for the last, couple of years when it comes to rule of law issues and the attacks on many other people.
Yeah, what should I say? I want to admit something, because if Fidesz party is inside or outside the EPP, of course Hungary is a member of the European Union, and they take part in the European election, and they have also members in the European Parliament, and we have to live with it together. The question is inside or outside our family, and there was a clear letter from our group leader, Manfred Weber, to say what do we have to change. We need not only a clear sign, we need clear activity that he wants to stay in the
You know what I think
EPP.
is so ironic? That Viktor Orban is verbally spitting on the European Union whenever he can, while holding up his hand and receiving billions of euros from that same European Union.
So what should happen then?
There should be much more conditionality. I mean, he cannot deny all the responsibilities that the European Union membership brings and that actually political agreements, for example, on migration bring, and expect it to have no consequences.
Isn't the problem, though, that then if you start going down that route, you're going to have to start putting conditions on money to, to Poland and Romania?
I think that's absolutely fair.
But maybe in 2 years to Germany, I don't know what's going on.
Exactly, who knows?
I would say that...
That's not a solution, I would say. It's not really a solution.
People might not like his policies, but he's a legitimate political player. He's a conservative. He's much more conservative than myself. He's definitely playing a national card, but both those positions are legitimate even within the European Union. They are not illegal. They are not against European values or against European political framework. And everybody knows and everybody feels that there will be a huge change, a huge reshape, a huge reshuffle in the European political landscape after the elections. And he might be, by explanation, he might be, maybe he wants to be a part of that big reshuffle. So now we are ahead of elections. Everybody's tacticking, everybody's playing games. You know, we have some liberal viewpoint, we have conservative viewpoint, we have Christian Democratic viewpoint.
And it's in the point that you guys you're all going to have to work with potentially more politicians like Viktor Orban in the future.
Absolutely.
Well, democracy is democracy, but it's not true that Viktor Orban has not violated European principles. I mean, how do you see his treatment of Central European University?
If he violated them, he would have, his country would have been kicked out of the European Union, which definitely is not the case.
Well, it doesn't go that fast,
Yeah,
but can we say that short of violating the treaties, there are violations of principles, and that is what's at the table right now. And I'm sure that the state media is not going to show that.
No, I know, we'll have to see and wait what happens, but it's going to be interesting, and it is a battle that's not going to end or be settled today.
Right.
Guys, thank you very much indeed. Again, we're going to take a quick break here on Raw Politics. Coming up, were you being tracked online? When we come back, how EU governments may have been giving advertising companies access to your data. That and more after the break. Welcome back. Now, a new report from Denmark suggests that many European governments may be in violation of the EU's own digital privacy laws. It looked into online trackers and found that more than 100 advertising companies were monitoring citizens without their knowledge. Rosie White and the Cube team have been looking into the reports.
How often do you head online to check out a symptom of an illness that you might be experiencing? Well, more than likely, you might end up on your government-run health service website. Several of them here that we've pinpointed. And there you might ask intimate questions. And we know some of the questions you might ask online. It might be about your pregnancy. It might be, how do I terminate my pregnancy? Help, I have HIV. What's next? When you land on one of those pages, it's a website that you trust. We know that when we scroll through Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, that there's a kind of relationship between us and the people that run those sites, that they're using our data. You don't expect the same when you land on a government-run website. Well, a new report from the Danish consultancy Cookiebot has revealed actually that might not be the case. They have revealed that nearly 90%, 89% of EU member state websites had third-party ad tracking companies looking at what you're searching online and harvesting the data. In total, 112 ad tracking companies working on government-run websites. In France alone, 52 companies operating on those websites. If we go a little bit closer in, it's this intimate data that they're collecting. In France here, we see 21 different companies were monitoring abortion services, search terms relating to that. In Germany, 63 companies monitoring a single web page on just maternity leave. But what does that actually mean? It's your data and a third party using these government websites is collecting it. Well, we spoke to one of the authors of the report, someone from Cookiebot. This is Daniel Johnson, and he explained when they've got your data, what happens next.
They collect this information to build a profile, a very detailed description of who you are. And these data, they are very valuable. That's their main economy. That's why they're able to provide their services for free. And the data are sold to anybody who wants to buy them, really. Mostly to advertisers who want to target ads to you. But it could also be insurance companies, employers, anybody who can have an interest in you in some way or the other.
This professor of security engineering at Cambridge University, Ross Anderson, sums up the gravitas of this. 25 of the 28 EU states are breaking data protection laws, tracking on their own websites. Now, what's clear is they weren't aware that this third-party monitoring was even taking place. The European Data Rights Group sum it up. They say this report shows how pervasive and broken online ad tracking remains. It means when you click on those websites, you can't be sure of who's collecting your data and where it ends up.
Thank you very much indeed. Now back with me to discuss this is Sam Wilkin from MLEX, and we've also got the MEPs Marietje and Peter with us as well. Sam, first of all, to you, it's quite shocking this, isn't it? How have we not known this has been happening for quite a long time?
It is. I mean, purely as a citizen and an internet user, I find it quite unsettling. And I think your reporter was exactly right when she said we expect this from any sort of free website, free commercial websites, but we don't expect it from something that's run by the government and something that can handle the most sensitive of personal data. And, you know, GDPR is very clear on this, that, you know, sensitive personal data are the most... are those that have to be protected the most closely. So, yeah, you don't expect it at all.
So something needs to change, clearly. Clearly, the current rules aren't enough. What does need to change, Peter?
But I would say to talk about this issue before election time is not a good time. For me, it's a very big issue. The next business, what we have to deal is after the election in the new parliament, because it's a big issue. And we need time also for this.
Isn't the point but the point is this is happening now, though.
Of course, no time to lose. I think that we have to, look at whether these governments have actually respected the existing laws, and I have a lot of questions about that. So I think data protection officers have to look at that, and legal experts have to look at whether they comply with the general data protection regulation. But secondly, and this is perhaps more important, this is an area where you would hope that governments, also in their own actions, would be setting an example, would be showing that the public interest comes first and that they show that people can surf and search online without being tracked. And so I really hope that this research is a wake-up call, because I fear that perhaps some of this is caused by a lack of knowledge of how different elements of websites put together sort of enhance the ability to track people's data.
But we have to ask. Very interesting to say we should not lose any time. But the other thing is, we should also talk about, have we the right law and order, or should we also change on this?
Sure.
And this needs time. Then I think the member states find some gaps, maybe, and they say, OK,
But also,
I stay on the
Sam, isn't this also about, there has to be a relationship between the state sector and private companies at the same time, and it's not necessarily bad that the state can share information with private companies.
In certain circumstances, that's absolutely fine, but this is clearly not one of those circumstances. And, you know, as Marietje said, you know, perhaps the state should be setting an example and going above and beyond pure compliance with the GDPR and actually thinking, what are we doing here? Are we comfortable with it? Now, from a purely sort of regulatory enforcement point of view, the GDPR is a very broad framework, and it doesn't deal with individual cases like this. It doesn't even deal with the issue of internet tracking cookies per se. It's technology neutral. So what we need is more laws, and, you know, the updated e-privacy directive, for example, will give much clearer guidance on tracking cookies.
So maybe more regulation is needed, but as Peter pointed out, it'll probably not come until the next Parliament. Guys, thank you very much indeed. We are going to take one final break here on Raw Politics, and coming up, Donald Trump Jr. may think democracy is all but dead in Britain. But what do you think is the will of the people being ignored when it comes to Brexit? Your call is coming up at 7 p.m. CET, and we want to hear from you if you think democracy is dead in the UK. The information is on your screen. You can call us for free on 00800 333 3702 and get in on the debate using the hashtag #RawPolitics on Twitter or Facebook. Our lines are now open, and join us after the break. Welcome back to Raw Politics. It's been a pretty busy show, but we've heard from the politicians, lots of MEPs tonight on the top stories, but we really want to hear from you. Your call is coming up at 7 p.m. tonight, and here's what we're talking about. Democracy in the UK is all but dead. Well, that's according to Donald Trump's son, weighing in on this week's Brexit chaos. As Brussels decide whether to grant Theresa May an extension, John Jr. says that the will of the people is likely to be ignored because of elite politicians in Brussels. What do you think? Is democracy in the UK dead? Crunch day for Viktor Orban. He's flouted the rule of law in Hungary, spread misinformation about migration, and he smeared the Commission President in a poster campaign. The European Parliament's biggest party is deciding today whether to expel the populist leader from its ranks. But some say he represents what voters want. So when it comes to Brussels versus Orban, which side are you on? It's been a rocky road for US-EU trade, but the two countries will be one step closer to negotiations after this week's EU summit. The EU may not want American chlorinated chicken, but the US is trying to get Britain on boards. Do you want to see more American products in Europe? Do you want free trade with the US? Europe, we want to hear from you. Is democracy in the UK dead? Brussels versus Orban, whose side are you on? And do you want free trade with the US? Well, you know what to do. The contact information is now on your screen. There is the number. It is free. You've got no excuse in the world not to call us in and tell us what you think. 00800 333 3702. You can also use the email address, rawpoll@euronews.com, or join us on social media using the hashtag #RawPolitics. And you can find us on Skype as well. Please do. Now, joining me to discuss what's going to happen on your call tonight, we've got Jonathan Bullock. He is a British MEP from the Brexit Party. Also with me still is Margarita and Sam as well. Jonathan, first of all, let's start with you. I suppose, do you think if Brexit is stopped in some way or stifled, do you think that is a sign that, as Donald Trump Jr. alluded to, democracy was dead in the UK?
Yes, I think it'd be outrageous if after 17.4 million people voted to leave the EU in a decision nearly 3 years ago, we don't leave at the appointed time, which is a week on Friday. We should leave and we must leave.
Maricha, what do you think? I mean, he's got a point, though, hasn't he?
He just founded a new political party to run in the UK. If you think that the democracy in your country is dead, it would be a rather peculiar move to start a new political party. I mean, look, when I look at Brexit and the whole process that's going on in London, it's clear that it's now coming to crunch time and to decisions, right? There have to be hard choices on trade-offs that are still being made. The Parliament's being consulted. But for those who want more democracy in the UK, I would say have a second referendum, allow the people to have their say. A lot has changed in 3 years, so let them see if they think the end result is also benefiting.
You can't disagree with that point, Jonathan, that people now know more about leaving the European Union today than they did, what, nearly 3 years ago?
We haven't implemented the result of the first referendum. You cannot, in politics, have another vote, be it a referendum, an election, whatever, without implementing the result of the first one. It would be an absolute travesty of democracy.
Sam, very briefly, what do you think when you look on at this?
My own view is that you know, democracy didn't die in 2016, or democracy didn't end in 2016. And as certain prominent Brexiters have said, the point of democracy is that you get to change your mind. And so there is clearly no majority in Parliament for any course of action.
It's an ongoing discussion, and one that we want you to have. Pick up the phones, get in touch with us. But now it is time for tonight's Raw Moment, which comes from the White House, where Donald Trump has met with the Brazilian President Bolsonaro. After swapping football shirts, the US president then had an idea. Let's have a look.
So we're going to exchange jerseys. I see that we got one, and this is the U.S. national team. And so that's an honor to give that to you. Thank you very much.
Okay,
thank you.
The access.
Well, we're looking at it very strongly. We're very inclined to do that. The relationship that we have right now with Brazil has never been better. I think there was a lot of hostility with other presidents. There's zero hostility with me. And we're going to look at that very, very strongly in terms of whether it's NATO or it's something having to do with alliance. But we have a great alliance with Brazil, better than we've ever had before.
Whatever you think about Donald Trump in these situations, he does seem to have a lot more mates globally than he did even a couple of years ago.
Than he did himself?
Yeah. As in, there are more people like Bolsonaro or Duterte in the Philippines who actually quite like the current president of the United States.
It's actually heartbreaking, and I think it puts a real spotlight on Europe that should show that the rule of law, democracy, human rights are still very, very important, because clearly that's not what the president of Brazil is working on.
Or democracy, indeed. As I say, ongoing debate. Guys, thank you very much indeed. And to all our guests tonight, certainly been a packed programme. But that is it for now. Don't forget, I'm on Twitter, @DarrenEuronews. You can also follow us on Euronews using the hashtag #RawPolitics. But for now, good night and thanks for watching.